yeah, Marion's dropping in the chat, which is great. And so those 8 House appointments expired in November, which is why the council didn't meet in December, because it would have meant that we would have been underrepresented as well, and the administration, which is typically a minority on the council, would have been a majority. And so that felt perceptionally wrong. And so we didn't meet in December. 5 of the 8 House appointments have chosen to be reappointed. And so 5 are not being vacated. And so only 3 seats are now currently vacant on the council. And that was Catherine Dimitrick, who represented low income and rural voices on the council. Big shoes. I mean, like, it has to speak for all of that. And then Chris Campany, who technically represented municipalities, and Brian Gray, who represented fuel dealers and energy associations, I think. I can't remember the exact title of the seat. And so those 3 seats, the House, we had notified the House back in July of this sort of pending change coming, hoping to get ahead of the legislative session. But because of elections and whatever else was keeping them busy, we didn't get seats appointed. And so now we have 3 vacant seats. So the council's meeting next Monday, but only because we have to approve a legislative report. Otherwise, we're holding out to ask the council on Monday how they'd like to proceed with those vacancies and whether or not they want to carry forward substantive business with a few seats vacant. So I have put forward a few suggestions to the speaker, but if you see based on the chart, if you have any suggestions or know people, happy to pass along people who are interested in serving to the speakers, the Chief of Staff, Connor.
And then Jane, the understanding would be that one of those either new fills or the 5 that are not getting off, one of them would be a representative to Just Transitions.
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, Marion and I were talking about this earlier this week. I think that we're hoping next Monday to ask the council if they're willing to schedule an all-day retreat. The steering committee, Sue looks excited. The steering committee wants to have an in-person meeting, and we want to do some work planning and some process discussion, like your memo that you're going to talk about tonight would be a great topic for that. But really focus in on acknowledging that with the biomass and transportation updates, that we're sort of done with the initial climate action plan, even though we haven't adopted the biomass ones, but once those are done. And now we're in this period of like in-between plans, and what's the role of the council? What do we want to be doing? Not dissimilar from what you all are grappling with. And so and then really start to stage a timeline for the next plan, which I can't even believe I'm going to say this out loud, but is actually due in 2.5 years, which doesn't feel that far away if you want to do better than we did last time with public involvement. So like the next suite of House appointments will all be here for the next plan, but the Senate appointments that are currently sitting will pass on. So anyway, yeah, so that's our hope, is to have a meeting. We're gonna propose on Monday to the council that March 6th, the Monday before town meeting day, ask if that date works for an all-day retreat.
And in that all-day retreat, you'd make a decision of what the representation to Just Transition would be?
Oh, sorry. I knew.
Yeah.
I was like
What's
thinking to myself. I knew Abby asked me a question. Yes, we would talk a bit about subcommittee representation as well too, because right now there's a lot of, like, Marion and I realized that we don't think the new youth member to the council has been officially appointed to any subcommittee yet. Actually, she was interested in Ag and Eco, but Ag and Eco's not really meeting. And
she has.
Like
Sorry, she did. She is on Ag and Eco, and she also wants to join Science and Data, but we should talk about that.
Okay. Anyway, so yeah, it would be nice to think about who the representation is to here, because I think right now it's just Sue and Kelly. And like Rural Resilience only has one, I think, counselor. Like some subcommittees are just like stacked now with counselors, like cross sector, and then some subcommittees don't have a lot. So trying to look at that equitably from distribution.
Thank you. Feels like there's so much that's happening and changing. It is really complicated to keep on track with everything. Are there any questions so far about the council? The next piece that we're going to chat about around changes and updates would be within our Just Transition Subcommittee. So we're sort of slowly kind of funneling our way down to kind of to our group, but just want to check to see if there's any questions based on what Jane just shared within A&R or the Climate Council at large. I think Mona asked in the chat that if we could share the link to the counselors and which body they were appointed by in an email, as opposed to just in this chat for those that can't access the chat very easily. So we'll certainly have it in the meeting minutes, but we can get it out to people sooner than that. Thanks, Jane. Okay. So there are some pending changes within the Just Transition Subcommittee. I want to acknowledge Sebi. So there was this moment in time where, not that the rest of the subcommittee necessarily knew, but Sebi changed jobs, and we thought, well, maybe that means that it's not an appropriate representation on the subcommittee. And so Sebi wasn't here for a few meetings. Plus, you were in transition, but and I'll allow you to speak to it as well yourself. But we came to the very comfortable conclusion that you are still living in Vermont, and even if your job has changed from VPIRG to elsewhere, we're really excited to still have you be a part of the Just Transition Subcommittee. So nice to see you with us tonight. I don't know if there's anything that you want to share with the group.
Sure. Well, I'm excited and energized to get back to it. Sorry to miss a couple of the other meetings, and I'm especially sorry to miss the in-person gatherings. But yeah, I started a new job at Ceres, which is a nonprofit sustainability organization, not the marijuana dispensary in Burlington. But it's great, and part of the reason that we weren't sure whether it made a ton of sense is because I'm now working on state policy, climate policy in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, which has made me very grateful to be in Vermont still. So no shade to New Jersey or Pennsylvania, but it's given me a new appreciation. So I'm really glad to have a foot in this work. And thanks for keeping me on.
Yeah, we're now expecting that you'll represent multiple states' perspectives and ideas when you're on the subcommittee. It's great to have you. Sue, is there anything that you want to share with the subcommittee?
Well, I could certainly use this time to share that I am finding it harder and harder to be present for this work, and have essentially asked or decided to step away from being the chair. And I have been doing it since we started, and we have in that time had a few transitions, and so that is my aspiration. But I also know we need to have at least one other counselor in that role. And I've reached out, and Kelly has talked about maybe playing that role. But for her, she wouldn't be able to do it. She said she might be willing to do it for sort of a transition until we have the next potential counselor who might. So I think that's something for us to think about. And we could welcome another participant into that circle. As you know, we've had 3 in the past. So that's, I guess, what I would like to share, that I really care about this work, and I care so much that I can't be the leader that it needs and deserves. I feel like I'm barely hanging on in terms of the time and bandwidth I can devote to it. So I apologize for that. I'm going to stay on the committee. I'm going to stay on the council to complete my term as a Senate appointee, which is 1 more year. I probably would not continue beyond that, depending on a lot of things. But I will work to make sure there is someone else representing the Community Action Agency network in that effort, if that's still a role that's part of the committee or the council. So that's that.
Thanks, Sue. I don't know what, yeah. So sad to think of losing you as a co-chair. And really open to the opportunity for other members of our subcommittee to step in and join me in that role, whether that's Kelly, given the capacity that you may or may not have, or other members as well. So I would suspect by our next meeting, we'll have a little bit more clarity around what our chairship will look like. And I encourage anyone to reach out to me if you have interest or willingness and capacity to step into that role. I could certainly use a co-chair or two. Indra and Kaska is now on. Indra, you put in the chat, is there anything more that you want to share about, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but due to a possible conflict of interest that you both may be finding it impossible to continue on the subcommittee as well?
I probably spoke too soon, so there is a possibility, but I'll keep the committee updated. Let's leave it at that. There is a possibility.
Thank you. And Jane, I see your hand up.
I wasn't sure, I was listening, but if Sue mentioned, and you mentioned Abby, and looking for another co-chair, that in the process roadmap that we have, we talk about subcommittees being co-chaired by an administration counselor and a legislatively appointed counselor. I also just want to suggest that one of the things we want to talk about at the retreat with the council is that work planning process document, and sort of reflect on what's worked well and what hasn't. There are a few things that I think there are challenges with in that doc at this point. And so if, as you consider co-chairs, if it makes sense to recommend a different model, I think there will be space to talk about that at an upcoming council meeting.
So again, not to belabor this point, and I want us to move on, but this does mean that there is a situation where we may not have because I'm an administrative appointed co-chair as I work for the Agency of Agriculture. And so if we don't have an available legislatively appointed subcommittee member with capacity to co-chair, we may have to wait until March or later when the council reconvenes and decides how we're going to have appointments from the council to the subcommittee. Am I getting that generally correct? Okay. All right.
Real quick, I think the work of this committee is really good. I'm sorry, my voice is really shot today. And I really care about what we're doing, but I also have my business to run and my kids making noise in the background. So it's something that I really want to support however I can with the capacity I have, but I also want to be honest about what I can do and not overpromise and under deliver. Sorry, not sure how much of this you can hear in the background. So I would really love to hear what people are thinking about maybe having wider representation for subcommittee co-chairs that doesn't be like a counselor and a legislative or an administrative appointed person, right? I'd like to, I think revisiting this is good. Sorry, I'm distracted by the kids. So anyway, I I'm here. I want to support this committee. I think it's great, but I also am limited in my capacity and ability to be present when there's crazy, loud kid stuff going on in the background. So, case in point.
Thanks, Kelly. Just so you know, we don't hear a lot of that background noise. So, but clearly understand that it's still a distraction for you. And I really appreciate, especially going into a new year, people setting boundaries and being realistic about expectations and what they're capable of for their time and their contribution. So, yeah, there's nothing about kind of Sue's making the tough and important decision for herself to step down as co-chair. That means that someone else that's not feeling prepared needs to step in. So we will get through the time that we need to until hopefully we reach a point in time where we have additional members from the council or folks find themselves with increased capacity. And that may influence our meeting schedule and the things that we commit to. It just may have to realistically be a function of what we have capacity to accomplish in this interim. I did want to briefly, we're running a few minutes over time, so I don't want to spend too long, but I think it would make sense to just, especially since Liz is here this evening, which it's nice to see you, Liz. I know that normally these Thursday 4 to 6 p.m. time slots don't work for you to participate. And so I just wanted to create space in the agenda that I'm not sure that we're going to solve it this evening, but just acknowledge that we have been meeting monthly, but for last month on Thursday evenings from 4 to 6 p.m. And that may or may not work it isn't working for all members of the subcommittee. And so I'm open to just a conversation about that or suggestions on how we might re-examine another time that may work better, or if this is just sort of the best time overall. And that means that at times we'll have limited participation for people that have pre-existing conflicts on this day and time. Yeah, Liz, please.
Yeah, for me, we have a regular standing meeting every other Thursday with our Labor Council at 5:30. So if it was just moved up a half hour, it would be a little bit more workable for me. Otherwise, I don't want to make this a difficult thing for everyone here who seems to be able to make it. But, traditionally, or not traditionally, but what I see commonly is a doodle poll or something like that to try to find best time for everybody. And, I never saw something like that for this committee, maybe it's just because when I joined, but I know the new year probably brings new schedules for people too, so that might be helpful.
Thanks for that, Liz. Maybe what we could do is sort of do a little bit of a survey out to see how people feel about the set Thursday that we currently have, but starting at 3:30, so starting a half hour earlier and going until 5:30, or a more preferred day of the week of the month and time, and see what we hear. I recognize we don't have everyone on the call now, so I'm not sure kind of settling on a shift in date or time makes sense at the moment, but we could commit to doing some kind of a poll to see where folks are at in the new year. Folks like that idea? Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, Abby, I think that sounds great. That's a good idea. I will say we did, when we initially chose the meeting date and as a full group, some things that came up, people wanted to make sure we had a time that was outside, mostly outside of work hours, since people are doing this in addition to a lot of people are doing it as citizens, not as part of their job, right? So I think that still may be important. And also a lot of people with children at the time that there were some conflicts with sort of end of the day. So I'll just put those out there if you're gonna push out a doodle poll to maybe think about those pieces. And it could be that people don't care and we have private citizens volunteering and they're happy to do that on Thursday morning. I don't know, but I think that's a restriction for some people.
Yeah, I appreciate those reminders of considerations that were taken into advisement when we came up with the day and time originally. Okay. How do people feel about, is there anything else around meeting times or frequency? I'm not sure that we're quite in a position to decide how frequently we want to meet. I think that always seems to be related to capacity, schedule, and kind of focus. So I'm not going to ask us to decide if we're going to meet monthly going forward, but kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we continue to discuss. Might be a conversation to have after we've reviewed this draft memo of Just Transition Subcommittee role. So I'm happy to do a screen share of the document. Sarah, do you feel like you have interest in?
Danielle has her hand up, but yeah, I'm happy to talk to her.
Hi, Danielle, please go ahead.
Just before we move on to the next thing, I was reviewing the link that Marion sent with the appointed folks on the council, and I was curious if the sectors that are vacant or that are already appointed are set in the law, or if there's an ability to like have a different sector represented in those vacant spaces.
They're set in the law.
We tried in our representation on this committee to really expand beyond that, but those ones are all per statute.
Question, Danielle, is there any opportunity to be flexible around that? Like, are we, maybe not to the council, but maybe we can, I don't know. I was trying to imagine if, like you mentioned, Jane, that we have the ability to make suggestions around the criteria for chairs. I wondered if there's also the opportunity to make recommendations around industry group representation as well on the council.
Without changes to the statute, I think those are set, the sectors. But I do think like one of the criticisms, which is why I suggested the co-chair, has been like the hierarchy of power and like who sits on what influential positions in the council. And like, that's why I feel like I don't think there is nothing that says who will co-chair subcommittees and whether or not those have to be counselors. And so that was written into a process document that the council wrote. So that can be changed via the council, not via law. And so that's why in thinking about who occupies leadership positions and speaking on behalf of the subcommittee, it doesn't have to be a counselor or a counselor designee on behalf of the administration. That could change. So more easily than changing the GWSA.
Okay, thank you. All right, so as Indra mentioned, and as we talked about earlier in November and as early as back in August, we began some kind of deeper discussions and contemplations around what's the focus of the Just Transition Subcommittee. What are we feeling is our primary function and role at this time? And we tried to articulate some of those charges based upon how the Just Transition Subcommittee was referenced in the Global Warming Solution Act. And so I think what came out of the November conversation was, could we as a subcommittee come to consensus around what that purpose and function is? And could we communicate that to the Vermont Climate Council as a way of kind of articulating how we expect to have ongoing engagement and utilization of the guiding principles and the scoring rubric tool that was developed by this subcommittee in previous months and years. So I'm going to do a screen share, and Sarah, you are willing to kind of walk us through the document that we kind of drafted for this subcommittee to consider and discuss with us. So we have about 35 minutes. I'd like to, stay on schedule, and around 5:30 do public comment.
Great. Okay, so maybe you can make it just a little bit bigger. Of other people. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. So Abby and I did our best to try and summarize where we think our conversations have landed us over the past couple months. So we just, the start of this memo really just says, we've been having this conversation around our purpose and role. Here's what the Global Warming Solution Act says. And then we did a little summary of what we've kind of done to date, really speaking to the Global Warming Solutions Act. So people may have thoughts about that, but obviously the biggest one being we developed the guiding principles for a just transition, which includes a scoring rubric tool. And those are intended to be actively used by Climate Council members, subcommittees, the legislature and administration to develop and refine climate action policies and programs. That's the recommendation that we have made, and the Climate Council has adopted it for itself. We provided training to Climate Council members. We supported public engagement activities. We participated in several subcommittees and task groups, and we've developed budget recommendations for public engagement. So it's not an exhaustive list of everything we've done, but it's kind of just a summary to say, hey, look, these are the things that we have done in relation to our charge. So then we kind of shifted to saying, moving forward, our primary role is not really meant to be the sole entity proposing equity solutions, but instead to ask important questions, provide tools and expertise for others to consider the impact of climate change on marginalized communities, and hold the Climate Council accountable for using the guiding principles for a just transition. And then I don't know if we should come back to that. I don't know if people like that sort of summary statement, but hopefully it is a summary statement of what we've discussed. And then we kind of have landed on these 3 strategies that we felt like moving forward. Here's how we wanted to position ourselves as a subcommittee. Here's what we thought we would be doing. We thought other Climate Council subcommittees, task groups, and state partners could come to us to present their equity analysis or their recommendations for our review and feedback, and they could just come to our regular meetings. And this has happened a little bit, right? At different points in time, people have done this, but we thought, let's just put it out there that that's how we want to use our meetings. And our expectation is that people would come to us and say, we've done this equity analysis, what do you think? Not come to us and say, do an equity analysis, or come to us and say, tell us what to do, but instead to get feedback or to have our review, right? That the second one would be the Climate Council, I think, would actively seek our feedback and review when policy strategies or recommendations or rules are being proposed. And I guess rules is really an administration thing, but anyway, I think just the idea that, and this has happened somewhat, but again, I don't know that we ever codified this idea that we would want the Climate Council to come to us for feedback on these things. And then the last one is being that our subcommittee members would continue to participate in Climate Council meetings and other subcommittee meetings and task groups, I think as a representative of our committee to provide our support and expertise. But Abby and I had sort of a question mark around if it was meant to be as a representative of the subcommittee. So it's really, again, these are things that we've been doing, but it's sort of pushing it out there as like, this is our primary purpose and role. There may be there's lots of other things we've talked about, but it seemed like this is where we were starting to land as a group. And so again, would be a memo to the Climate Council. So the next piece in the memo really just says, think about this and tell us what you think. And if you just tell Abby, I didn't realize you put me on there. That's fine. But tell Abby or Sarah what you think about this. You know, but we kind of said, this is what we think we should be doing moving forward. So I'm curious about, I think the bulk of our discussion is maybe not on the list of what we've already done, although if people had thoughts about that, we could go back to that section if we missed something important to highlight there. But then I think the bulk of our conversation today, we anticipated being about what do we think about what we've said about our role moving forward. Do you all agree? This would be a memo from, not from Abby and myself, but a memo from the subcommittee. What do you think? What did we miss?
Hi guys, can you hear me? I'm so sorry, I'm driving.
Yeah, we hear you, Kashka, go ahead.
So just one thing, I wanted to, as far as, you know, our ask or our stating that other subcommittees and the Climate Council should come to us for recommendations and, you know, kind of an overview of whether or not they're doing things correctly. Is that an ask? Is that like you should do that, or you need to do that prior to moving forward? Does that make sense? I want to see the distinction, whether or not it's something that they can do if they so choose to, or is there almost like a requirement that that's something that subcommittees, Climate Council needs to be doing prior to moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Kashka. I think I see some heads nodding, so people get the question that you're asking. It doesn't really say whether it's required. It's sort of stated as if it is something that would happen. It's sort of positioned as like, this should happen. I will just say personally, if we were gonna say every time people need to, we would have to meet a heck of a lot more than we are. And I don't know that we're prepared to like have a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting even to say. So we'd have to maybe think about the parameters around what exactly do we mean when we would say we want the Climate Council to commit to bringing, or subcommittees or task groups or state partners, because Abby and I also included state partners here, right? Because we want things that that the state administration is working on around rulemaking, those kind of things to also be able to come to us. So that's something to maybe think about there and chew on, but I appreciate your point. How about, yeah, go ahead, Tricia.
Sorry, no, and I completely understand that point. Oh my gosh, as far as capacity and time, and us being able to do that, it's almost as if the only thing being as far as just transitions, right? It's almost having like a stamp of approval from Just Transitions. I guess when something is brought to Just Transitions and looked over by the subcommittee members. So it's like a stamp of approval because it is an added step for the Climate Council for other committees. So would it? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud because I could see it coming back to bite us in the butt. Like, oh, okay, so this was put forth, and my gosh, it really doesn't consider the rural community, or you know, or something of to that respect. Do we not have a Just Transition subcommittee? What are what are their roles if this has gone through without this consideration? So I'm just thinking out loud as I'm driving.
Yeah, thanks, Kashka. And I think I see Liz and Jane, so I want to keep moving and hear other feedback. But I do say this was sort of something that we've gone back and forth over on the past few months, right? Is our ability, is it our job to do the equity analysis, to review and approve all of it, to make the recommendations, or is our role really a more accountability to ensure that other people are doing it and providing support for other entities to do that work. And I think the push and pull there is a little bit, I think I just want to go back to and remind folks who maybe haven't, it's been a few months, that we had a lot of conversation around just capacity of this subcommittee, right? Like what do we really have the capacity to do as a subcommittee? So, but maybe there's a piece there we can play with to strengthen the language, or and to be fair, you don't have this in front of you. You only just heard me read through it and saw Abby share it on the screen. So I think people might want to chew on it. Liz?
Yes, thank you for sharing this. When it states propose, I'm wondering, at what point in the process do we really want to have the Climate Council seeking our review and input? Because there's a difference between when something's, really close to its final draft and the beginning stages and, getting ideas. And I think, oftentimes a lot of mistakes in terms of equity can be resolved more quickly if we're just brought into the earlier process. So I'm almost wondering if that should be changed to like drafted versus proposed, and what others think about that.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I think drafted, I think things go through lots of iterations around drafted, but yeah, I think the proposed language, I think Abby and I weren't thinking it's sort of at its final stage so much as like in development, right? Which I think speaks maybe more to what you're saying, Liz. Because it could even be before something is drafted, right? It could just be something that people are talking about and they want to bring to us. And maybe I'd be curious to hear people agree. There could be different stages in the process where it could be helpful. Yeah, and Mona's saying listen more to community needs are developed versus are proposed. Yeah, Claire, thanks for that. And yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's what the guiding principles say people should be doing, right? So part of what people are bringing things to us for review or feedback, maybe part of what we could be thinking about is like, what are the standard things we want to make sure we're, when we're poking at people's proposals, right? And one of them, I think, is this piece that you're bringing up, Mona, around what has the community said about it, and that we could be asking people that question. What did the impacted community say about this? Jane.
Yeah, I really like that conversation you all were just having. I kind of like the idea of actually explicitly stating like coming before the task groups or like subcommittees even get underway with the work, sort of like talking about the idea or topic and concept and getting feedback for consideration at the beginning. So, but why I raised my hand was I was curious around these strategies. I was wondering about speaking to the role of Just Transition subcommittee members being represented on task groups and subcommittees to influence sort of the drafting all along the way. And I know Chase has been really invaluable to helping with biomass and bringing that perspective as they meet ongoing. So it's not like the beginning and the end, it's like all throughout. And so I can still see the need to come back to the full subcommittee once, like at different critical junctures, but I really like the liaison approach too. And so wonder if that would be put forward as an ongoing strategy to ensure that still kept moving forward.
I think we saw that as number 3 here, Jane. I hope maybe we didn't articulate it well, but just that, yeah, that members would continue to participate in those other task groups and subcommittee.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe it was the order of operations that was confusing me because okay. I left and maybe move that one right up to the top. So that's like to and be explicit in drafting those proposals and stuff, but still. But yes, thank you very much for that. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Chase.
Thanks for the shout out, Jane. That was awesome. Very kind. And I heard you say something else that I don't know if it's in these three things, but I thought it was a great idea that there might be like an iterative way that the liaisons can like know when to and do a good job bringing information back to the Just Transition Subcommittee. And relatedly, you know, like I, as a liaison, haven't actually like pulled out the rubric, and I'm wondering if, you know, like that's like a moment of reflection for me to do a better job in the future. That like I could have and should have pulled out the rubric and used it in these other meetings, or perhaps we decide there's like inflection points that are better. So an open question. But one additional thing that I was hoping to add to the discussion here is sort of like the division of labor question of like, should the other subcommittees do a lot of the work, or should the Just Transition Subcommittee members do a lot of the work when it comes to applying the rubric? And I was thinking there that, and we might all sort of be in agreement on this anyways, but that maybe it's a little bit of both. Because I suspect that, like, for example, when it comes to identifying how to find like new employment opportunities to replace those that will be transitioned out when we move away from polluting technologies to cleaner technologies, like there are people in those other subcommittees that have a lot of very relevant and helpful expertise in that space, and like we can help them, but we might not know those answers ourselves. And so I was just thinking, like in that space, perhaps in particular, there's probably a lot of room to elevate the knowledge and expertise of others in other places and help them do that work.
Chase, I wonder if I can offer a thought there, because I think when we originally drafted the guiding principles, and the rubric is really just asking, have you thought about this guiding principle, right? If you look at the rubric, it's really just asking that question, creating sort of a tool in the process for scoring. But I think we never thought, in fact, we tried to avoid the idea that it's the Just Transition Subcommittee's role to use that tool. So I have always thought that what we want to do is that we're the experts on the tool. We want to cultivate sort of an expertise around like what's in this tool, what's in the principles, to kind of infuse that thinking, but not necessarily to do the tool. So I just say that it's in support of your statement, which is like, I can't really answer this question. Other people have to answer this question. I think I go back to this feeling like our job is to ask the question and to make sure people are answering it. And I that's my sort of my own personal position, so I want to own that. But I also feel like that is a little bit where our conversation has gone over the past couple months too, is sort of how do we push ourselves into that role, but also honor that we have a lot of expertise and sometimes do have the answers. All right, Indra, I'll stop trying to answer everyone's comment on everyone's comment. I apologize for that, folks.
Well, first, I think we have made a significant progress from like, wondering what our role is to like really drafting what we want to do. I do understand the limitation between the capacity and, what we exactly want to do. But when it comes to the rubric, perhaps we can frame that as it is, the Just Transition Committee will take the ownership of reviewing and updating the rubric. Maybe that is something that we can do rather than asking other consultants alone. Because I mean, like even from my learning perspective, like compared to like when I first joined the Just Transition to now, my understanding of what climate equity looks like can take an ownership of, like reviewing and updating the rubric. That's something the Just Transition can do. I don't know.
Indra, I feel like I didn't get entirely what you were saying there. Was cutting out just a little bit. I think I'm not quite sure whether you were saying that we would update the rubric, meaning what's in the rubric, or update the rubric, in other words, like using the rubric and doing the scoring of other people's proposals.
So more of updating the rubric annually will be the responsibility of the Just Transition, because the equity metrics will change over time. And rather than letting any other entities do that work, maybe the Just Transition can take an ownership of that. Once a year, we allocate one of our meetings just focusing on, what have we learned this year? How can we update these metrics? Doing the measurement and putting the numbers and, making recommendations other consultants or the organizations can do. But I think the Just Transition should take ownership of updating the metric, because this is the committee that really takes equity into consideration, and we have a group of people who actually care about it. So I think that will, embolden us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's a great addition. Thank you for clarifying. And Liz in the chat box, I don't know if folks can see it, said, yeah, exactly, because there could be other existing examples out there of other people that have done some other things and other rubrics, or knocked it out of the park, so to speak, in Liz's words. And yeah, it's an iterative thing, and we want to be continually improving upon it. It was never meant to be sort of a never changing document. So I love that idea. If other people love that, maybe we can add that as like a number 4 here, Abby, as in terms of just, yeah. Sue.
I also saw Kelly having some comment in there. I also like the iterative thinking about the rubric and improving it. I also, like Sarah, feel very worried about setting an expectation that this subcommittee somehow, gets a say in, that everyone has to come to us and that, it's a requirement. I think more setting it as an expectation. Somehow, I'm not sure the language is the way. Maybe you've tried to do that. There may be something else that we could add there. I also worry about our sort of level of expertise, per Chase's point. Like, I don't know that I'm certainly an expert. But I think the more that we set an expectation. Now, I do want to clarify. I think what we're trying to do, is put these guiding principles, not just for the Climate Council and the Climate Action Office, but sort of for state government, right? Aren't we sort of trying to get, and so I wouldn't want to set an expectation that that many things come to us, but I would want to set an expectation that things related to the climate action plan come to us. So more things that are about implementing the plan as opposed to things in general, even though we want to educate, I believe, and do workshops. And I think we should still consider working on that for the guiding principles. So maybe continuing to try to educate and train around the principles is something we want to continue. The last thing I do want to mention is I don't see in here, and I could not be seeing it, but it could be there, something ongoing about public engagement. That's important, I think, about what we may be able to provide, ensuring or facilitating even in some way a robust public engagement process. Now, I am hearing that eventually, according to Jane, we're going to have a lot more staff in state government to try to help with that. So I want those folks to be kind of reporting to us what's going on, so we can really help be a leader in that space. That I would like to see in this too.
So a couple of things there that I wonder if we could add if other people agree. One, I wonder if there's a piece, maybe it's like a 1A here. No, not 1A. Sorry, we shifted these around. Maybe it's a 3A that speaks specifically to public engagement efforts. So what you're saying is like we want to be holding the Climate Council and the implementation of the work to be holding accountable to the public engagement piece. And so maybe we just want to pull that piece out specifically to say that, right? And then, because this didn't really speak to that, I appreciate that. I wonder if that captures kind of what you're saying. Okay, and then the other piece, I think we were striving to without saying these things must come to us, to set an expectation. We were trying to put language in place that sort of set an expectation around it without boxing ourselves into a workload we couldn't manage. So maybe Abby and I can go back and play with a little language on that. I'm not sure I can wordsmith it in the moment. I'll chew on it. Yeah, I don't know who was first, Liz or Indra. Liz, why don't you go? Or Indra, or I don't know.
I don't know who was first. Indra, were you first?
I was just clapping to what Sue said. It was not a hand raise.
Oh,
okay. I don't think this is probably for this memo or anything, but it just occurred to me, and as in terms of our mission to educate the council members and the community at large, and even ourselves, have we practiced using the rubric on sample pieces of legislation ourselves, and really practiced using this rubric in the process? And maybe that could be some of the work we do in terms of outreach and education as well. I imagine there's a lot of climate policies out there we could use as examples and practice, like seeing how to apply this rubric to review it.
Yeah, fantastic idea, Liz. I think we haven't sort of tested it in that way in a long time, really, since we were initially creating it. So as a subcommittee, although I think individuals on the subcommittee have used it, so that's a great idea. We could do that, and could be a part of this annual review process too. But like, if we aren't using it and knowing how well it's working, then we won't know how to make updates. That's great. Okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Kashka loves it. Okay, great. Anything else? So I wonder if Abby, I don't know that we're going to get this to a wordsmith place by the end of today. We have a couple more things to incorporate, like stronger language around expectations, and anything, and public engagement piece, make sure we get that right, although I like what you've said here. Anything else from folks in terms of what we've missed or where we've missed the mark?
I mean, one piece that I'm hearing is that we may need to be clearer where in the process we expect the council subcommittees or task groups to engage the guiding principles, the rubric, and our subcommittee. And I think that comes up for me because I know when we've talked about this in the past, and to your point, Liz, when we have tested the tool previously, it was pretty clear that a concept, in my recollection, that a concept needed to be quite developed into almost the stage of kind of a program or an initiative, not just a line in legislative language, before the rubric could be very valuable, because the detailed questions that the rubric would ask you to attend to meant that you either needed to be the person that had designed the program or the legislation, or the kind of the concept, or you could reference that greater detail somewhere. And so if the objective is about exclusively utilization of the guiding principle and being responsible for utilizing the rubric, the scoring rubric, I think that's one piece. I think the other part that I imagined of this clarified role and purpose is that somewhere in the process, you should come and have a conversation with the Just Transition Subcommittee. Either you come to us, we come to you, and we ensure that you've started to think about these principles as you're designing your program. And not that, again, in my opinion, that we are giving it the stamp of approval, but we're like infusing the conversation and the questions and the concepts into the design and the development at the appropriate stage in the process, or acknowledging that I don't see that we have the capacity to be able to be responsible as a subcommittee of primarily people volunteering their time to conduct the scoring rubric on every recommendation, major policy, funding proposal, and rule. But instead, we're just here as committed representatives of wanting to ensure that just transition and representation of marginalized concerns are being considered every time something's coming out of the climate action plan or the council. I just talked a lot there. I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Mona.
I just want to ask, when is this guiding principle will be available, and it's going to, or when it's going to be used? And if you are not, if the just transition does not have the time to be like teaching people about all this big document, why we don't make simpler infographic about this guiding principles that anybody can, any council can just, when he read it, you know, they know exactly what we're talking about. Very easy. Why it has to be, you know, and then if they want to deep dive and go read this, I'm not sure, 70 or 100 pages of guiding principle, then they can go. But I want everyone to be easy to access and read, and without, you know, like committing a whole week to read all this information. If they want to, yes, they are welcome. But why we don't do something easy for them to access?
Thanks, Mona. Yeah, I saw your chat box piece around let's think about like an infographic or like a one-pager. I think that's a great idea. The principles are published. Thankfully, they are not 70 pages. They are, I think, 6 or 7 pages with and then with the rubric, or maybe it's 10 or 12 with the rubric. But yeah, I think a simpler version could be great and would be still be, your point is well taken, would be more accessible and sort of keep things more front of mind for people. It's a great point. Could be something we work on with our new staff person. So thank you. Indra, is that a hand?
Yes, it is. So one thing is, you know, as we have been struggling, like defining our own role, I think this is a great step towards clarifying that, because regardless of whether or not Climate Action Committee, you know, council approves this or not, if we all agree this is our goal, I think this will help us like take actions. Because even as we are talking, like in my mind, I'm like, oh, we can actually organize a meeting and create that workshop, you know, document for everybody to take a look at. Thus far, I think we have been like questioning what exactly we are trying to do. So regardless of whether or not the Climate Council approves this, or, you know, whatever their response is, if we have a common understanding among the members of the Just Transition Committee, I think we can operationalize this to like actually do things in 2023. So I as somebody who has been complaining about the lack of, you know, clarity on the purpose and all of those things, I think this is a great step. And I think if we should start internalizing this as our function if we agree to this. So.
Fantastic. That was such a roaring endorsement. I don't know what else to say. Sebi, your hand is up.
Sure. I endorse that endorsement of the process as well. And I do appreciate you, Abby and Sarah, fleshing this out some. One idea, which is somewhat like could be an example of how we might, or something that we might approach through this lens is, I know last year there was a clean heat standard proposed, vetoed, almost overridden in the House, and that's one of the biggest, you know, clean energy, climate priorities, or climate pollution emission reduction priorities, potentially moving into this year, an affordable heat standard or whatever it might be rebranded to be. I'm just thinking through like procedurally, so that concept was in the Climate Action Plan, which is published, but to kind of be relevant and I think dust off like the rust maybe in terms of what I'm hearing is we haven't really used these guiding principles, and we haven't really had like something to like any meat to chew on, or whatever metaphor is appropriate. If there is like conversations around an affordable heat standard or whatever it may be, that the Climate Council itself is a stakeholder group within a legislative process too. So presumably there are some climate counselors that would be participating in the actual legislative like committee hearings. And so maybe we invite those legislators or those representatives on the Climate Council to come to one of our meetings and sort of like have a preliminary conversation about the concept to refresh for anybody on this committee who like may not know the nitty gritty details or the spark notes and start to inquire into something like that. And I mentioned that because I just listened to that delightful Vermont edition, like the intro to the State House, I think it was yesterday that they did live, Connor Cyrus and Michaela Lafrac, and it was a buzz, and that was something that was mentioned. And so I think part of my struggle is like feeling a little bit like what our work is right now is very abstract, not super relevant to what's happening. So that's just an idea, and hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. No, yeah, I think we should, yeah, you said a lot in there. I think that's great. We could think about really using it. We could think about engaging with others and using it around legislative work that's coming up. Appreciate that. Kosh has her hand up. Virginie, Chase has his hand up. Virginie has a comment. It's 5:30 and I know we have to pause for public comment. And Abby, you wanted to make sure we did that. So maybe I'll pass it back to you for a second.
Yeah, thank you. Why don't we, let's just take a quick little pause in the discussion, open it up for public comments if this is the time in the agenda that we said that it would be provided and offered, and then we can return to the comments from Kashka and others. So opening it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public here this evening that would like the floor? Carol, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Hi, I have really bad internet connection right now, so sorry if it doesn't go through well.
We can hear you okay, Cheryl.
Oh, good, so far anyhow. I guess I was hoping that you would get to the biomass task group before the public comment, since I'm very involved with paying attention to it, but also very involved with the clean heat standard and with just transition. And I really think it's a good idea to keep going and be involved with the I think Chase is who said to be involved with helping a just transition for people that have to change their jobs. That's a really big and important thing coming along. And I want to say one thing about the biomass task group recommendations. I don't know what's going on with it. I guess nobody does. That it hasn't been given to the council yet, so that's interesting. And with regard to that and the clean heat standard, the clean heat standard, I think it's really not common knowledge how detrimental that would have been had it gone through. And I was, it's really very unequitable, that clean heat standard. And I don't know what the new Affordable Heat Act is going to be. I don't know the differences, but I hope that they have differences that will address the issues of why it didn't go through before. And a lot of people like 350 Vermont and many other groups didn't approve of it and didn't want it to go through because of how unequitable it is. And how not just to people, but our other relatives, the natural lands and ecosystems, really devastating to them. So I hope that somehow people, the information gets out to everyone that how unequitable it was. And I'm hoping that the next one will be good. And it would have been detrimental to greenhouse gases and all of that. So I guess also things that the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee said really weren't used when, so I don't know, there's not equity going on within the whole Climate Council and the subcommittees. And I'm just hoping that that changes. So don't leave and, keep going. Sorry, I haven't come to this one very often. And that's
Carol,
about
thanks for your comments. I see Alice's hand was raised. Alice, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
First of all, I'd like to thank Marion for posting the link in the chat to the guidance document. I'm going to find it very helpful. The reason why I'm here and I keep dropping into this particular committee is that as a planning commissioner, as the chair, myself and others in the committee wind up dropping into other areas like Flood Ready Vermont, Winooski watershed meetings, and FEMA meetings, things like that. And this issue of social equity, social justice, making sure that you're casting a net that's embracing the entire community that you're serving, and developing this guidance and policies and what do we recommend and what's best, what are best practices. Everyone I go to is dealing with this issue, trying to understand and write policies that work for their particular programs. And it's interesting to me in that these are issues that I want to bring more to the forefront of the kind of work that the Waitsfield Planning Commission is doing in terms of town planning, the issue of affordable housing and housing in general, even our water and wastewater project that's going to serve our downtown. These all have social equity components that's part of them. Our town plan has them also in what we do to serve this. So I just want to let you know why I'm here, because it's very helpful to watch you develop this. I think it's going to be helpful to myself and the Planning Commission in Waitsfield to iterate policies. And that's it.
Abby, you're muted. I don't know if you're talking to us. You can't unmute it. Okay. I don't know. All right. I don't have the agenda in front of me anymore. So maybe, I know there were a couple more comments on this conversation though. So let's do that first and then hopefully Abby's back. Koshka, I think you were next. Going back to our document. Maybe you're not there anymore. How about Chase?
Thanks, Sarah. I just actually wanted to pile on to what Sebi suggested as as a possible avenue to begin some of this work, like actually implementing it. Whether, you know, it could be the Affordable Heat Act. I think that could be a great avenue to engage with the legislature. Two, I think another thing that I might add to that list, which we've already begun to dig into in this subcommittee, would be the biomass task group recommendations. So that would be like through the Climate Council as a venue. I'm unaware of any sort of like climate rulemaking going on right now. You know, the advanced clean cars rules just went through, so I can't think of like a regulatory thing in this particular moment, but I think when one rises, we should seize on that opportunity. But I think right now we've got two good things we could dig into, and maybe others I'm not thinking of. But anyways, I thought it was a great idea, Sebby.
Great. So just kind of, I'm hearing, yeah, why don't, even though we don't see it as our job to necessarily be the ones to always use the tool, it'd be good to try to do it, maybe in partnership with some folks, because we're not sure if this tool is perfect and maybe we want to adjust it, and that could be a good experience. Great. Kashka, are you there now?
I am. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be concise. So to Liz's point, and I think then it was, you know, Cheryl and Sebby as well, and now Chase, I think I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I think it would be really beneficial for this committee to even take a look at a couple different programs or pieces of legislation like the clean heat standard or something that, you know, the governor has vetoed, and kind of put them side by side and do an exercise as a subcommittee of how we could make the legislation better, more equitable by using guiding principles and using the rubric ourselves, so that we would feel more empowered in helping others and training others on how to do it. So taking not just one piece of, not just one program or not just one piece of legislation, but taking one that has not passed and seeing the holes that it has from an equity perspective, and saying like, okay, so what are the things that need to be changed in order to make it more equitable, in order for this to be something that you know, that benefits those that typically aren't at the table, most likely. So that's me going out on the limb. I think it would be important for this subcommittee to have to do that. And I think that was initially Liz's point, to have something that a piece of legislation, but I'm saying maybe even having more than one to look into, digest, and do that exercise as a subcommittee. Thank you.
Now I'm muted. Yeah, so just reiterating that we like that idea of doing that exercise with a couple different things to practice it. Could be a good experience for us to see how well our rubric and our principles are really how digestible, how usable they are. And I want to say, from my own personal perspective, I'm not sure that this committee has all the answers on how. I think we have the right questions. I think we know how to ask the right questions. I'm not sure, and maybe this goes back to like Chase's point, like I might not have all the answers on how to help a certain sector transition to new employment, because I'm not an expert in that, but I can ask the question, have you thought about this and how are you going to do it, right? And so maybe that's a part of what we'll experience when we go through this process. So that's great. All right, so I think, oh, Claire's got her hand up. I was trying to wrap it up, Abby. Maybe I'll hand it back to you after Claire.
Sounds good.
Oh no, I was just going to add to what you were saying, Sarah. It just quickly reminded me of the exercise that Indra led in our hybrid meeting around what we actually think the guiding principles mean. And it just struck me that actually working through, if we're going to be the experts on them, working through examples would probably help us clarify that, like what we mean when we have certain principles and questions, and just help better kind of synthesize and make that more concrete. So
great. All right, Abby, back to you in terms of next steps and timeline and.
Great. Yeah, I have a new battery in my mouse. I can communicate and move around the screen again. It's amazing. Thank you, everyone, for sharing some feedback and having some conversation around the memo. I don't believe that we were on any expedited timeline to think that we needed to get this to the council for their meeting next week. So I think we can take all the time that we need to be able to finalize the document. And then I think we have some additional functional testing of the tool and of the rubric piece that we can add to some future meetings. So I just want to do a quick time check. So per the agenda, we should be in kind of the Climate Council update piece, but I know we've also put off for Chase multiple meetings now, review or any comments around the biomass task group recommendations. So I do want to take at least, I don't know, maybe we take 10 minutes if we need it and turn our attention towards those recommendations. And again, Chase, I know that you have been that liaison to the biomass task group. There is a plan for and there seems to be some confusion and some question around where are we in the process with these recommendations and having them be reviewed or the options considered by the council. I don't know if you want to kind of launch into that for a few minutes. I can pull up the recommendations as well. They were also sent to everybody in the agenda.
Thanks, Abby. I don't know, Jane, if you're able to tap in here or not, but I've actually been out on parental leave. I just got back. We welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world, and it's awesome. And I have no idea what's happened with the biomass task group in the past couple of weeks. So I could brief you on where it was a few weeks ago, but I'm probably a little bit behind at this point. I'm sorry, Abby. It's on my to-do list to get caught up.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot in that
No,
way.
I appreciate it. It gave me an opportunity to tell you all that a baby girl was in, has joined our family. So
that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, that is, I feel like we should just end with that, but congratulations, Chase. I always, when you see parental leave email replies come back, you always hope that it's for something good and not something bad. So I'm really glad to hear that it was good news, and congratulations to your family.
Thank you.
I'm happy to give a quick update, especially since Cheryl Joy alluded to it in her public comment. We as a task group, and Chase was, I believe you were still with us, we got as far as we as a task group were going to get with the draft recommendations. And they are final, or I shouldn't say final, that we reached consensus as a task group to advance them as drafted to the Climate Council. And there is one component within them that includes a decision point for the Climate Council. Yes, I see that you're highlighting it. You're showing it on screen, Abby. That's option 1 and option 2. And we really diverged as a task group on which option was preferred. And since the ultimate decision is with the Climate Council, we decided to put it forward. And then had, I believe, Chase and Richard Hopkins and Liz Miller as the counselor on the task group were the group that were then going to present these recommendations as drafted ultimately to the council, including this option, discuss the background and consideration for how they were drafted, and then put forward to the council how they would like to move forward with them. That was supposed to happen at the December council meeting, and we worked as a task group in earnest to prepare for the December council meeting. And then all of a sudden we got clarity from Legislative Council that the 8 House appointments were in fact not carried over automatically, but had been expired. And so because we were short 8 council members, canceled that meeting. And so there's nothing to do with anything with the biomass work other than that the council itself has stalled due to waiting for those new appointments. And so one of the things we intend to talk about when the council meets on Monday briefly, that meeting again is largely focused on approving a legislative report that the council is obligated to deliver to the legislature on January 15th. We plan to talk about outstanding work planning issues from 2022 and highlight some additional needs for 2023 that signal the need for a longer retreat for the council. And so this is very much a priority to move forward with the council in the coming, as soon as they're able to meet again and determine whether or not they want to meet without those 3 representatives or wait for those. And I know that in our internal conversations, know that the seat representing rural communities feels like a very key voice to have at the table when we consider the biomass recommendations, but of course are happy to do what the council wants and move forward as they wish. So yeah, so I believe, Chase, I know that as in this sort of final draft, Chase, as I said, and I can say it again, did an excellent job representing just transition issues as we met as a task group, but I know that Chase didn't want to carry the burden, nor did any of us really, and had hoped that Just Transitions would meet as a subcommittee and discuss these recommendations. And now seeing your proposal and memo on how that might want to happen, I actually think there's probably a time at a February meeting where we can invite the task group still to come forward to the Just Transitions Committee, go through these and some of the thought process behind how equity considerations were carried forward in this document, and even consider if we wanted to apply the equity assessment specifically ahead of that conversation and do it at your next meeting. So I think that there was this need for a Just Transitions subcommittee consideration as a whole to carry forward to the council. But I think we should, now that we've been gifted this extra time, not waste it and consider using the process that you've outlined and bringing forward folks to do that, because this is really impactful and it's at a critical juncture. So I'll stop there, but that's sort of the update for now. And love the idea of trying, if you folks are supportive, asking the task group if they'd like to do that.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Chase. So I think I'm just getting tired at the end of the day. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding, or we're all on the same page. So this is not still at the task group level though, because it's been finalized with these 2 options to go to the Climate Council. And you're saying they're not going to talk about this on Monday, because Monday is about the legislative report. And so the council may not speak to these recommendations until March, when other council appointments have been filled. Sorry to ask you to repeat, Jane. I'm sorry.
No, yes, thank you. And I know I speak a lot of words too, so I appreciate being clear. So I do not expect the council to meet in February, but I could be wrong. But I suspect what will happen on Monday, they will have a meeting focused only on the legislative report and recommend scheduling the meeting in March. And that will be the next meeting where they take up substantive business. So the task group had agreed that they were done, had taken the recommendations as far as they were going to take them before they went to the council for consideration. But that doesn't mean the task group wouldn't be supportive of carrying forward this intermediate step that had been proposed to them before it goes to the council in likely a March timeline.
I would like to suggest that we ask them to do that. I would like to suggest that we ask them to take that interim step and come to our next meeting to discuss how they incorporated and thought about equity in this, and to have this conversation with us, and to perhaps use the scoring rubric if they have the time and ability in advance of the next meeting. I think that would be great. And not just rely on Chase, who I think has been doing a good job, but have the whole group come, or some representatives.
I mean, I imagine Chase concurs that the task group would largely be supportive of that. So I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I suspect the sentiment will be to work with you all on that. So.
Great. Any concerns or different proposals than Sarah's? I think it's a great idea to kind of practice this methodology and see how it works, to not have all the answers, but bring the experts to us with the impetus of having an equity consideration prior to the conversation, and we can ask some tough questions and engage in discussion at our February meeting. It was Jane's proposal, you're right. So
Can I just ask, who are the, can we ask the council members, or at least one of them of the, who on the council is on the task group? Jane?
Yeah, the only one, the only counselor on the task group is Liz Miller. But I suspect Liz has been a great, leaned into this work, and I would hope she'll be willing to do that with you all.
Okay.
Okay, great. I love that takeaway and to do and test of our process. We're in the final few minutes of our meeting this evening. I know we did not, I wonder, Claire, if you want to just take a minute or two and talk about the Department of Public Services public engagement plan. So this has come up a couple of times. It's another very relevant piece of work to this subcommittee. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to give you maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's probably all I need. So I think I've talked to the subcommittee in little bits and pieces about this effort. We started back in the summer when we opened this process to take a look at our renewable energy programs and policies. So we have a renewable energy standard, but also a couple other supporting programs. We put out a request for input, or as I think Sue had called it, a request for engagement, to think about what the process might look like and some key issues and decision-making criteria that we might want to consider as a department. And we took the feedback that we got from that process at the beginning of the fall and used it to inform the development of a public engagement plan, which we released in the beginning of December, which I think Abby had sent out. And I apologize for the link. We just had a website migration. There are a couple little blips on the way, but glad that everyone got it eventually. So that public engagement plan is informed by that public sort of initial public step, and it outlines what we see as sort of a framework for how this process could go. It puts forward a timeline over the next year to take a look at these programs and policies and get input from stakeholders and communities on what renewable energy policies and programs in Vermont should look like moving forward. It outlines, just at a high level, 3 sort of core phases. The first that we're in the middle of, which is looking at doing some additional outreach and awareness building of this effort to communities that may not have been reached by that request for input at the very beginning of the process, and also putting forward some educational opportunities. For example, we're planning a webinar series to begin answering some questions and putting forward some information on current policies and programs, answer questions that we got through the sort of initial process. The second phase is looking at a more substantive policy conversation, looking at informing recommendations about how we might want to take our existing renewable electricity programs and policies and change them moving forward. And then the last phase will look at writing up those recommendations and informing, sort of putting forward reports that would inform the next legislative session potentially, or put forward recommendations for legislators to consider. And so that's in the document. We put it forward as a proposed plan of action. We have a public comment form for anyone who wants to add, things that we missed or things that they'd like us to consider moving forward. And I'll just add that we put forward sort of our goal outcomes of the process, which includes a completed guiding principles rubric. So we intend to incorporate the principles and the rubric to the extent possible. And I'd love to think about when it's appropriate to engage with the subcommittee about all that. So happy to talk with any folks offline when we have more time with comments and questions. And the last point is we are coordinating with the public engagement task group on some of this outreach. So
thank you, Claire. If nothing else, I think we clearly have marching orders and focus for our February and March Just Transition Subcommittee meetings if we want to engage the biomass task group recommendations in February and maybe invite Claire and other members of public service to talk with us in March about their public engagement plan. So putting to work our strategy and our purpose. Thank you. All right, so we're a minute before 6. Our next meeting is currently on the calendar for February 16th. I know we talked about doing a poll. I'll do my very best to get that out. I too am at a complete capacity max, so I'm going to do my very best to see if we can put that out before our February meeting and see whether there's an alternative date and time that works, but also at the same time wanting to reach out to the biomass task group to get them to attend our February meeting. So it may be that we keep the same date and time for the next few months, and then, or at least the next month, and explore the feasibility of changing date and time for later into the new year.
Abby, I'll copy you and Sue, but I'll agree to reach out to the task group and get that going.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you, Jane. Sue, thank you for being a great co-chair. Sarah, thanks for being a great co-presenter today, for everyone's input and comment. Enjoy the new year. It's super dark out, but the mornings are getting brighter.
Thank you.
Have a nice night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy
See you next month.
2023, everybody. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
You too.
I have a feeling.